So I said this at the beginning, this is going to be a little more informal due to some COVID absences in today's session, but what we want to do is talk about how we can weigh in on the maps and give you an update of what we think are the major takeaways. So to give some background and context for folks who might be newer to the conversation, Pennsylvania Voice has been engaged since even the census process to make sure that communities of color that are growing across the state were counted correctly, and that racial equity is a core concern in the redrawing of the maps, that the new maps reflect the new populations that are here in Pennsylvania. So last fall, through the members of our redistricting work group, 700 community members in 5 counties submitted maps of what they would like to see their districts look like. We testified multiple times in front of the LRC, which then released its proposed maps right before Christmas in December last month. So from that point, the public has 30 days to provide comment, which today we're going to talk about what we think that comment should look like and why it's so important. And then those 30 days end on January 18th. It's actually a little more than 30 days because of holidays that fell in between. So, and from there, the LRC has up to 30 days to come out with a new set of maps. So before we talk about our analysis so far of the maps, do people have any questions about the process that got us to this point? Great. And at any point, feel free to put a question in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get back to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Shalawa Ogunmefen, the Executive Director of PA Voice, who testified at the LRC hearing last week to talk about some of our major takeaways of the maps that we're seeing so far.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologies, I'm trying to open up what I want to share on my screen. All right. So I think that there's one thing that we know right now that we can confidently say, and then there's a lot of other things that we cannot confidently say in this moment, but we have questions about, and we're continuing to ask folks who have expertise in mapping and data more questions so that we can better understand, like, where we can better understand our thoughts around like where we are in the mapping process. And so the first thing that I want to say is that we are still in this process, right? We have until, as Cecily said, next Tuesday, which is the 18th, to actually give public comments, but we are continuously learning. We're still doing research. We still have racial polarization analysis that are being done so that we can make sure that our analysis is actually as strong as it can possibly be in terms of the geographies that we've been working in, understanding that there are 2 maps that we're talking about, the Senate maps and the House maps, and there's a lot of districts, right? There's no perfect map. There's no map that, there's no central perfect map that we can all just look at and that everyone would ever agree on. And so with every map and with every line, there's a decision that is being made to either keep communities together, to break communities apart, and to either hold on to power or to actually create more opportunities for power. And so that is the way that we're looking at this process. And because our partners have been consistently doing work in 7 geographies, we're particularly looking into those geographies. And so I am going to share my screen. Put you in presentation mode. To let you know what our initial thoughts were on the maps. So, but we are still in the process of making sure that we have the strongest analysis possible. So I just want to give a disclaimer to all of that. And so one of the areas that we were focusing in on was Allegheny County. And so the map that you see on the left-hand side is what the current maps look like, the maps that folks ran on in 2020. In the middle, what we see is the maps that the LRC has proposed. And then on the right, where we see map E, that is actually the districts that our coalition actually proposed based on the feedback that we were able to get from over 100 people in Allegheny County. And then the feedback sessions that we had with the mappers who decided where a community member said, hey, this is where we want to make adjustments. And the mappers made adjustments accordingly. In Allegheny, I'm sorry, I don't know why this just happened. In Allegheny County, one thing to note about these districts is that we started off this process believing, because what has been done in the past in Pennsylvania is in Allegheny County, there has been 2 districts that have had over 51% people of color. And what that does in Allegheny County, where we know that there have been candidates who have won without 51% districts that are people of color in order to win, what it does is make it so that the way that the districts are drawn has to start off with, how do you take all of the Black people in Allegheny County and squeeze them into these 2 districts so we can get to over 51%. We were under the impression when we drew these maps that we needed to actually get to 51% because it was a federal mandate. Our current understanding is that it was something that was consistently done, but there was not actually a federal mandate that was imposed to create those 2 51% districts. I'm noting this here because in Allegheny County, the districts that we proposed met those qualifications, but the way that we would have drawn those districts had we not thought that we needed to get to 51% is very, very different. Because when folks have been working on the ground, the likelihood of folks voting together to elect candidates who actually believe in the values and the interests of communities has been something we've seen reflected in candidates being elected. So when I say that, when you look at Western Pennsylvania and you look at Rep. Summer Lee's district, that district is about 25% Black. I think it's 1.2% Latinx. And she was elected as a candidate who was actively saying things like, we want to make sure that we are rebalancing power and not continuing to take power away from folks who have for so long experienced like deliberate barriers to participation. When you look at Rep. Austin Davis's district as well, that's another district where we saw a 25% Black community. I think it's under 1% Latinx community and not under 1% like Asian American community as well. That district also elected a candidate, voted together and elected a candidate of choice. And so when we look at Allegheny County, just what is required to elect a candidate of choice in that geography may not match up what is required to elect a candidate of choice in other geographies. I'm noting that. Why does this keep happening? I'm noting that to you all, because when you look at the percentages on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, every time I try to move my mouse, the slide changes. And so I'm trying to like hover over this box on the bottom left-hand corner. When you actually look at that, what you'll see is the districts above and what the percentages are of the API community, the African-American community, the Latino community, and then the overall people of color percentage population-wise. And then what you see on that bottom row is people of color percentage, but voting eligible population, voting age population. And so the difference between these are the people that live in this district and these are the people who live in this district that have the power and ability to actually vote. And so as a coalition, as people who are looking to these districts to create the opportunity for people to actually be able to elect candidates of their choice, the percentages that we look at and that all of our analysis are based on is that last percentage at the bottom. The people of color, citizen, voting age population, because at the end of the day, those are the people who actually decide who is going to be in office. The overall population is incredibly important, but when we're talking about redistricting, boundaries and districts that people win and lose on based on people that are voting, we want to make sure that the actual indicator that we're looking at in terms of who can win and who can't win is actually based in the voters themselves. So that's one thing I just want to note for the way we're looking at this. When we look at Allegheny County right now, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look for where I wrote this. And we look in Allegheny County right now, we see significant alignment between the proposed maps and the unity maps that we submitted. One of the districts actually remains 73% intact. We continue to seek input from our partners in Allegheny County, many of whom I think you all have heard from, have seen be an active part of this process around the specific boundaries in the city of Pittsburgh and the Mon Valley particularly. But when we look at this Allegheny County map, this is not our priority. And this is not one of the areas that we're continuing to look at research to see whether or not these districts are going to be able to elect candidates of choice for people from the BIPOC community. So I'm going to pause really quickly there to see if there is any questions. Please type them into the chat. All right, so when we go to Lancaster, the district we see on the left is the current district. The district we see in the middle is the LRC's proposed district. And the district that we see on the right is a district that was actually proposed by our partners who were talking to community members who drew their own communities of interest. And so when we're looking at these maps, again, the percentage that we are consistently looking at as a population is the percentage of people of color, citizen voting, age population, which you see all the way to the right. The percentage that we proposed in this district as a coalition was 53%. The percentage that is proposed in LRC map 50 is LRC map 50 is 44%. The percentage in the current district in Lancaster, HD 96, is 49%, meaning the way that we are reading these, the way that we are reading this district is that we have actually reduced the population of people of color that are voting eligible when we're looking at the way this map was drawn. We are doing analysis in this district to see whether or not that population that they use is a population that is actually going to be able to elect candidates of their choice. The analysis that we have experts doing right now is called a racial polarization analysis. So it's going deeper into the history of the community, the voting, the elections, how everything has actually happened, how voting blocks of people. So does the Latinx community vote as a block with the Black community, vote as a block with the Asian American, Pacific Islander community? We're going into a lot of research on all of those things, so we know whether or not a candidate can actually win in the district that was proposed for the state house district that includes the city of Lancaster. And so we are not looking at this as of right now as this is an area where we are absolutely going to ask for a change, but this is one of the 4 geographies that we are continuing to do research in so that we make sure that we understand what the ability is of a candidate of choice to actually be able to win an election here. I'll also note here that in the city of Lancaster, we intentionally asked for the LRC to actually not prioritize the municipality of Lancaster and instead to prioritize keeping the community together by going outside of the district of Lancaster because, I'm sorry, we don't have the map here, but because some of the populations of people of color actually fall in the geographies outside of the district of Lancaster itself. That is something that the LRC adopted based on us making that ask and recommendation. When we look at York County, in York County particularly, I think this is the area where we see the most significant adaptation of the unity map that we actually proposed. There is about 90% alignment between the district that we asked for and the district that the LRC actually drew here in terms of keeping the communities that we asked for together. We are still looking into like this geography, making sure that what we're seeing here gives the ability for the community to elect the candidate of their choice to the best intention that we can. But again, similar to Allegheny, we're still looking at this area, we're still getting feedback, but it's not one of the primary 4 places that we are focusing the racial polarization study into, particularly because the areas that we are doing that are the areas that we are the most concerned. When we look at Berks, Again, district to your left, current, in the middle, the LRC's proposed district, and map B is a district that our folks actually proposed. This is another area where we are continuing to do an analysis to make sure that the community in Reading is best represented, giving these maps, and will have the opportunity to elect their own candidates of choice. This is an area where, based on the based on the history of candidates that have won in the district, the 127th and 126th, we are concerned about whether or not this map gives the actual ability for the Latinx population in Berks to be able to elect their own candidate. So this is an area where we have additional questions, and we are continuing to ask those questions, and are looking for as much information as possible so that we can decide whether or not this is an area of priority that we want to make sure the LRC actually looks at and adjusts. Lehigh County is actually one of the areas that is interesting to us in this moment, but was not actually one of the areas that at the beginning of this process, we introduced a unity map in. We have partners that are consistently doing work in Lehigh. We did not have capacity to get over 100 unity map submissions so that we could actually propose a unity district that we felt comfortable with. But when we look at Lehigh County, both in the proposed House district map and in the proposed Senate map, we're looking to better understand exactly how they made the decisions they made and whether or not a candidate of choice is actually going to have the ability to be elected because of the bifurcation of Allentown in these proposed districts. I think our current thought is that the separation or splitting up Allentown in the Senate map is much more egregious than the separation of Allentown that we see in the LRC map. However, again, the way that we are looking at this process is whether or not candidate has the ability to actually, a candidate of choice has the ability to win with the populations that we're seeing inside of Lehigh County. And because of the way that Allentown was split in this map, it became an area of interest for us that we're currently doing additional analysis in to make sure that a candidate of color can actually win inside of these districts.
Shala, I just want to make sure you're seeing a couple questions in the chat.
I'm going to come back to them.
Okay.
Philadelphia County. I think Philadelphia County is probably one of the areas that we propose maps, but what we were looking for in the map is a little bit different than what we were looking for in some of the other maps. So what we saw in Philadelphia was the creation of 2 additional districts in the House. Both of those districts that were created are predominantly African-American districts that give the opportunity for a new African-American candidate to actually win office because they do not have incumbents drawn into those districts. I think when we look at Philadelphia, one of the things that we as a coalition have really been looking at is additional opportunities for Latinx folks to actually be able to elect candidates of their choice. And so we're still continuing to look into what in the Philadelphia and Southeastern region, where that ability for Latinx folks to elect candidates of their choice is actually increasing. One of the asks that was made to the LRC by Fair Districts PA was actually to create a majority Latinx Senate district in Southeastern Pennsylvania. That is not something, we have not been working as a coalition as heavily in the Senate districts, but in working and having conversations with Fair Districts, it's something that we have a question about. So it is something that we asked the LRC last week to just look into, because we want to make sure that the final map gives additional ability for Latinx folks in the Southeastern Pennsylvania region to pick up more seats. And that's not something that we actually saw in the original proposal of the LRC map as it exists as of right now. Okay, come on. Oh, it's not going because that's the last map. The last thing that I want to show you all, and let me stop sharing my screen and answer these questions before I go to the second part, actually. Will these slides analysis are different from what we got before be sent to us? Can you share a little bit about what you mean about what we got before?
Right after, about a week after the maps dropped, Marissa had sent us a preliminary analysis of the maps. And so if what I don't have it memorized, but if what you're sharing significantly is different now, and also in, I guess, a week or two, when you have the full analysis, are we going to get an ongoing updates?
Yes, absolutely. Are these reg numbers for these? If so, can you share them along with the slides? Tony, do you mean like, are these voter registration numbers? Can you expound a little bit on your question?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically, like in addition to the Latino CVAP and the Black CVAP numbers, if you have the Latino registration share in each of these districts, and like the Black registration share in each of these districts, or is that something outside of the scope of these specific maps?
It is. We would have to do additional work to get those answers, I think. Let's round back to that offline, but I think we would need to do additional work to get those answers.
Okay, yeah. And then
feel free to jump in if you disagree with me for some reason.
And then, I'll follow up with you, Shadawa, offline, because I have some maps I want to show you, but the registration numbers specifically is something I want to like talk with you about, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you.
Yes, of course. It is my understanding that the LRC map is particularly problematic concerning Latinx vote, that it actually is worse than the previous map. Is that correct? I think that we are still looking into exactly like what I can confidently say in this moment is that I don't think that we are making that the growth in the Latinx community in this map doesn't match the growth in the ability for Latinx voters to actually elect their own candidates in this map. Because the growth has been so significant. I think that what we are still looking to make sure that we fully understand, and a lot of this is the racial polarization like analysis that is very, very detailed and very, very extensive. And, you know, the 30 days that we have for this public comment period just makes it very difficult for us to like answer all of the questions that we have. And so I don't want to say that it is worse. I can't confidently say that in this moment, but I can say that it is not the growth in the ability for folks to actually elect candidates of their choice doesn't match the growth that we've seen in the Latinx community in Pennsylvania over the last 10 years. Any analysis of PA House District LRC drawing in South Philadelphia, they affect Latino business quarter in South Philadelphia. Pennsylvania Voice, we are not, the PA House District. No, that's not something that we've looked into. Do you have thoughts on that?
Preliminary thoughts that I think that corridor was divided. We're still looking into it. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that the voice comes from that geo area than from us. Obviously, the holidays have gotten in the way, but we understand that they could have done a little better. Thank you.
Can you, once you hear that feedback, can you let us know? And whoever ends up putting that on the record, I would love to make sure that I am lifting up anything that folks are hearing in terms of like those type of specifics. So I do want to make sure if that's a point that folks from that community feel, I want to make sure to reiterate that with the LRC if possible. So if you can share that analysis when folks have it, that would be amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the last thing that I just want to show folks and make sure that we are all taking a look at, come on, open for me. The LRC, when they introduced these maps at the end of last year, they introduced it in a way where they talked about the new majority minority districts that they created. And so I just want to walk through those as well. Some of the places are places we've already talked about. Some of these are not places we've already talked about. And so District 9, this is in the Philadelphia area. You know, I think that we've already talked about the Philadelphia analysis, so this isn't one of the ones that I really want to focus in on, but just want to remind folks that these districts are the districts that were created that do not have an incumbent inside of them. District 22, which is a district that is near the Allentown area and geography. This is one of the districts that was created when they split up Allentown. It doesn't have an incumbent inside of that district. So folks do make the argument that when you don't have an incumbent, it gives a higher opportunity for candidates of choice to be elected. And so I do want to note that all of these districts do not have incumbents. District 54, which is in the Norristown area. Norristown used to be a little bit, used to be grouped with like East Norriton and West Norriton before. Norristown is now grouped with Plymouth and Conshohocken. Again, there is no candidate, there is no incumbent in this district. District 104, which is, oh geez. My Pennsylvania is struggling in this moment, but I knew this very short ago.
That's Dauphin County.
Okay, so this is the one, yeah, sorry. This is a map that splits up Harrisburg. So Dauphin County was not one of the areas that we were focused in on at the beginning of this process, but in seeing the creation of this district, one of the things that we noted was that the city of Harrisburg is actually split into 3 districts in the LRC's proposal. The city of Harrisburg itself is a city that is 51% Black, and it was split into 3 districts. We are looking to better understand why that was. This district does not have an incumbent. The representative that has this district now is Rep. Patty Kim. She has the city of Harrisburg. And so they split her district in a way that actually reduces the population, the percentage of people of color voting eligible population in this district. We are still doing an analysis to see whether or not this district is a district that can elect a candidate of choice, but it's very notable that the city of Harrisburg was split into 3 separate districts. 116, this district is in the Luzerne County, Fayette County area in geography. This is not an area that we were focused in on. This is actually a district that, if you look at the numbers right now, may not stand out as a district where there's significant opportunity for people of color to win just by thinking about the geography. But the Hazleton area is really growing in terms of Latinx population. I think this district was likely a district that was created with the opportunity for it to actually elect a candidate of choice in a couple of years. But creating a district that allows the representation and election of a candidate of choice today is very different than a district which will perform, 5-6 years from now. But there is a very large growing population of Latinx folks in this area in geography. And I think the interest of that community is what they were trying to create here. District 203 is the second district in Philadelphia that was created. I believe this is about 30% Black. It's about 20% Latinx. There's not an incumbent in this district. But if you look at the numbers, the Black population significantly outnumbers the Latinx population in this district. So though technically it may be a coalition district, I think that this district really leans as a Black district more than the opportunity for Latinx folks to actually get their own representation. And then in the Senate map, the district that was created was this district in the Allentown area, where they split the city of Allentown in half in the state Senate district, which is just something that is very interesting here. The other thing to note of the Senate districts that I want to make sure to leave you all with today is that the deviation in terms of districts in the Senate districts is something that Fair Districts folks pointed out to us, and we also think is of significant note. When you're talking about Senate districts that are in more rural areas and more white areas of the state, those districts are tending to fall on the lower end of the 10% population deviation, right? And so you'll see rural districts that actually end up having almost 40,000 people less in them than urban districts that seem to have always fall on the higher end of our standard deviation and what is acceptable by law. When I testified to that last week, Senator Kim Ward reminded me that they met the legal requirements, but as Judge Byers testified to a few months ago, you can meet the legal requirements and still be actually diluting the power of communities of color to actually effectively elect candidates. So that is one of the things that we're continuing to look into, is that population deviation, because there seems to be a fairly significant pattern that we see from the way that the maps were drawn. So I feel like I just said a lot. Are there any more questions inside of the chat? I think that some of these questions may be Cecily questions, and I apologize, I do have to jump off the call, but I am going to hold off for a couple of minutes if there's any more specific questions about the maps.
Shalwa, I'm going to jump in and grab you for one question, which is I heard in the opener someone asking about post comment period. I know that they then have 30 days to turn around a new version. Is there anything else you want to share about what we expect to happen besides that after the 18th?
Well, I just looked at my calendar and realized that my next meeting was actually pushed back. So I don't have to jump off very quickly,
Great.
which was, so I wasn't actually going to be able to really answer this question, but now I can. I'm glad you asked it. So I actually want to pause on that. I'm going to come right back to that question, but I want to bring folks' attention to two things that are actually happening in this moment that are happening in direct response to the LRC's proposed maps, and some of this kind of like backlash that we've seen from conservatives, because when you're used to having an outsized amount of power and someone's asking you to share it in a way with other people the way that you should, you're going to be upset about it, because to you it feels like you're losing something when really you're giving something that you should never have had. And so we are hearing as of tomorrow that there is the constitutional amendment that was introduced. Oh, we're in 2022, last year now. The Constitution amendment that was introduced last year to actually have judicial gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. So the way that the Supreme Court is chosen right now, and as the way the Supreme Court is chosen right now, everyone gets to decide on the Supreme Court justices. Right? The way that judicial gerrymandering and this constitutional amendment are proposing that the districts are drawn, or the districts, or is proposing that judicial candidates, instead of running statewide, they run in specific districts. And so there would be a judicial candidate from Western PA, a judicial candidate from Southwestern PA, a judicial candidate from Southeastern PA. And so instead of there being candidates and judges that we all elect, there'd be a smaller amount of people, and there would be districts, which then, because we're all on this call and we understand how important redistricting is, those districts would then be subject to gerrymandering, which is how our current balance of power in Pennsylvania has been so off for 30 years. And so folks introduced this constitutional amendment last year when the LRC was first appointed. Right, in order to kind of say, hey, we have power and we can take your power away. And this isn't up for the governor's veto, because this goes on the ballot to voters who typically vote yes on constitutional amendments. And so do what we would like you to do. If not, we will try to take your power away, so you are no longer the backstop for the map drawing process in Pennsylvania. And so that came up that's one of the constitutional amendments that is going to be proposed, I believe, tomorrow and voted on. The other constitutional amendment that we've seen from Rep. Seth Grove is a constitutional amendment that would take the power in the redistricting process away from the LRC and give that power to the state legislature. The same state legislature that has had gerrymandered maps for the last 30 years in Pennsylvania, and that is currently upset because we are asking for the maps not even to be fair. We're asking for the maps to be better than what they are right now. Because let's be all clear that the map proposed by the LRC is not the map if we started the process from scratch, which was our original stance and my personal stance. If we start this map from scratch, the maps will be significantly better than where they look. But if you start the maps from the maps that existed, there's only so much you can do. And so what we're seeing is two constitutional amendments that are moving through the state legislature right now in order to take power away from the LRC, who proposed these maps, and then to take power away from the Supreme Court, who are the folks who decide whether or not the LRC's maps are gerrymandered or not gerrymandered. So I just want to note that kind of in context of like what is going on, what is happening, and how are people responding. In terms of the process, after our 30 days ends the 18th, the LRC has another 30 days to actually propose their maps. those maps are going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides, yay, these maps we think are fair, we think your process was fair, we think this process was great, or boo, we don't think this process was fair and we need you to actually, or not the process, we don't think these maps are fair and we want you to go back to the drawing board, as they did in the last cycle, because the maps that were originally proposed were so bad. When the Supreme Court says yay or nay, there is very likely going to be lawsuits across Pennsylvania. And I, depending on what the Supreme Court says, that is going to, the lawsuits are going to come out of. If the Supreme Court says, yes, these maps are great, I am sure there are going to be a slew of conservatives that are suing the maps because they are upset that they're losing power. If the Supreme Court says these maps are not great, I am sure there are going to be a slew of big D Democratic interest folks who are suing because they believe that the map is fair and the Supreme Court is wrong. So there's going to be some level of appeal process for these maps. And so what we are looking and preparing ourselves for is to make sure that we have, I don't want to say backing, but that we have evidence for whatever our stance is and what we would like to see in this process, which from the beginning has always been, how do we create the most opportunities for people of color to actually be able to elect candidates of their choice throughout this process, which is why we're doing the racial polarization analysis, because having that analysis is what it actually ends up standing up in court. Having that analysis is what we can actually fall back on. Like the unity maps that we did are great, but we have to be able to show whether or not a candidate can win or can't win. And so if the Supreme Court supports whatever the version of the maps are, and it's a map that we support, then we'll likely be looking to file supportive things with the Supreme Court, right? Amicus briefs to say like, actually, this map could have been better, but we think that this map is really, really good and we should go ahead and pass this map. If things go the opposite way and we feel comfortable with the maps and we're like, these maps are good, these maps are fine, they should be implemented, and then there's a lot of pushback on the maps and saying that they're not fair in one way or another, particularly through the lens of racial equity, then we may have folks who are looking to our analysis to be able to defend or back up like what they are saying in terms of filing with the courts. But everything really gets moved to the courts once the LRC votes. And once the LRC votes to approve the maps, really at that point, everything is going through the court, with the exception of the current power grab that is happening by conservatives in the legislature right now to take away the power the LRC currently has, not for the next process. They are trying to take away power in real time for the current process. I see your question inside of the chat around the consecutive terms with the exact same language. Yes, that is 100% how it happens. So it would be passed in the first term that it would be passed on for the take the power away for the LRC. The first term that would be passed is this cycle. Like it already passed yesterday, I think. And for the judicial gerrymandering one, it passed once already. So this would be the second passage for judicial gerrymandering, and we may actually see it on the ballot in May or whenever the election is. Should we do anything now to prepare for the lawsuits? I think that the most, at least as a coalition, what we can do right now is make sure that we are backing up what our stance are. I think that getting as much information about how you feel about the maps is great. Getting, as much analysis as you can about the maps. Like we can start drafting, like feedback about the maps, but outside of making sure that like we know what our thoughts are and putting together, positive amicus briefs, I think that we are really waiting to see what the Supreme Court does and what the LRC votes to approve. But, in terms of these two constitutional amendments, I think there's a lot of power in space that like individuals have to be calling the legislators right now to demand that like these two things don't actually get voted yes on. And I think that it is likely that the folks that are thinking about voting yes on these are going to be like more conservative legislators. So if people live and you have members who live inside of more conservative legislators districts, it is going to be like best practice to actually get them to reach out to their legislators and make sure that they understand and that they're watching what they're doing right now. Any other thoughts, questions, things that are coming up for folks in this moment? I feel like I just gave a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So
it just strikes me that we're in the, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. We're in the then they fight you stage of things. This action that we've done has brought about a reaction. And if the work wasn't powerful and important, it wouldn't be bringing about this kind of reaction. I'm going to be sharing with everyone in just a second the chat, and we'll also send it out by email, some talking points for submitting written comment. And it has the instructions for doing that as well. And again, the deadline is the 18th. So the more people that are submitting comments to the points that Shala was lifting up, even the things that we like in this that are going to be under attack from people who don't want racial equity in the maps because it hurts their chances of winning, that is really important. So this is a document I just put in the chat with talking points. And again, so I think quantity is very important here. The more people that are submitting these comments from the more parts of the state, the better. And they're due on the 18th. So that's 1 week from today. So for right now, our biggest push is that you get as many people as possible in as many parts of the state to be submitting comments, lifting up, yes to more districts where people of color can elect representatives, and lifting up some of the things that were said here today. So like for Harrisburg folks, this question about the district. Most importantly, we just got a cameo from Shala's new cat, who I haven't gotten to meet yet. So any other last thoughts or questions before we close out?
So I see the congressional redistricting process question in here. I adopted the cat from Jasmine, so she's biased. So I will admit and just say at the top end of this that I am not anywhere near as familiar with the congressional process as I am with the LRC process. So please verify everything that I'm about to say. My current understanding of the congressional process, wait, I'm sorry, Jill, you are actually on the phone. I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, but do you want to give an update on where things are with Common Cause and the congressional process?
Yeah, are we talking about, are you looking for information on specific legislation or just what's going on with the congressional maps? I'm not really in the redistricting too much. I'm kind of around it, but I'm kind of just taking over Alexa's spot temporarily. So I'm not really in the thick of it. So I don't know if I can give you too much detail, but I can try to answer some specific questions.
Yeah, cool. I can give an overview and then jump in if something I'm saying sounds a little bit off, or if there may be a question that I can't answer. But I think that there is a very big criticism of the congressional process right now, because they haven't actually given like the opportunity for public input in like a real way. Like the map that they put out to ask for public input wasn't like a map that they drafted. It was a citizen created map. And they put that out and they're asked for public input around that map while they create in secret, like the map that they're actually like trying to introduce and push through like the legislature.
Yeah, I was gonna say what they did was they lifted up the Holt map, and then when they went to vote on it in committee, they passed blank maps. And that to us kind of was a red flag. And when they did, when they were responding to the criticism, and they did respond, the quote unquote Holt map was altered. So there was a bit of analysis going on. I don't know the status of that analysis, but there was a little bit of analysis going on about how much that diverged from the Holt map. But it was, yeah, the whole process was just real not transparent, did not, give people the opportunity to respond to what was being, voted on, those blank maps. That was just kind of the way they've always done it. They would just pass it, like in the past, they would just vote on blank maps and then come up with something shortly before the final vote and just pass it like that. So yeah, there was a lot of criticism around that.
So folks are on a lawsuit about that. I see in the chat Committee of 70, Common Cause, I believe, is also on that lawsuit. A couple of other of our folk allies in state, they're suing based off of like the lack of transparency generally. I think that what is going to end up happening and what has typically happened in the process is the legislature passed what they believe to be a real map. The governor is going to end up vetoing it. The Department of State has said that they need the maps and they need the shape files by January 24th in order for petitioning to actually start on the timeline to make sure that the May 17th election stays on May 17th. I think there's a lot of concern happening right now about whether or not that is possible to have a congressional map. If the state Supreme Court, it's going to go to the state Supreme Court to actually draw their own maps. Again, there's a judicial gerrymandering constitutional amendment they're trying to do because they're upset about that. But the state Supreme Court, if they have a map ready in 2 days, then there's a chance that we could have the maps ready by January 24th. But there's a very high chance that it's going to take longer than that before this process is concluded. I know I've heard some people wondering whether or not, and I think we've seen a couple of open op-eds about the pushing back the primary date to a date in June to allow for the completion of the congressional process. If the timeline gets moved on that, it pushes that primary back, not just for congressional, but for the LRC process as well. The congressional maps the election has to happen under new congressional maps because we're losing a district. And so I think that that's one of the things that folks are working on figuring out over the next couple of months, or not months, the next couple of weeks, because we only have 2-ish more weeks before the Department of State would actually need the shape files for the maps so that they could let people know so they could then petition in the districts that they want to run in.
Right. And part of the problem with that is Republicans have expressed that they're not interested in pushing back the primary. So they are proposing alternatives like, running all candidates on statewide elections and on all this really bizarre stuff that is like, the end of the line of solutions before we even get to the solutions before that. We're not sure if it's just saber rattling or, the regular bravado from, House and Senate Republicans, or if they really intend to make this as much of a mess as possible. But yeah, there are the petitions in the court are to impose standards on the maps that, whatever maps are passed, whether it's court drawn or they accept, the LRC maps or the Holt map or anything like that, is that they are drawn, that the process is open and transparent and they are drawn with communities of interest in mind, and actually have some standards in place. So,
and then on who makes the decision, the state legislature could move the primary back, but to Jill's point, the conservatives in the state legislature aren't interested in doing that, and so it would go back to the Supreme Court.
Right, that's my understanding.
Again, to the constitutional amendment that is being proposed to take away the Supreme Court's ability to actually be elected in a fair way.
Right.
Welcome to Pennsylvania. I always say that at the end of talking about this because it's just like, it's where we are and it is what is happening. But thank you for that question.
All right, everyone. Thanks for staying engaged through all the muck of this process. And this is a big moment and we will definitely keep you posted. Hi, Kat. Bye, Kat. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.